it's actually kind of weird. I was talking with some of the people yesterday that this is the 13th time we do the online test conf, and I remember the first time we did the online test conf, it was way long ago, and it was a small room, and we were really, really anxious because we didn't know if people were going to come. And the fact that we keep doing it and that people give us great feedback, and not only the people who are seeing this live, yes, guys and girls, everyone here, great, but also people who see this later on, it's great to be able to share stuff with the community, and I'm really, really happy that we're able to do this. So without further ado, what are we going to talk about today? So one of the things that I was at the PNSQC conference that was about what was it about 5 weeks ago in Portland, Oregon, and a lot of the talks were about okay, so what's in store, what's coming, how should we get ready for what's coming, and my approach was a little bit different. It's not what's coming because it's already here, and if we notice, it's actually what's happening here. So what I want to talk about today is stuff that you can take and start doing. I don't say today, you're here today, but tomorrow, how can you start looking into testing a little bit different? And I'm not talking about revolutionizing the way that you're working. I'm talking about improving the way that you're working by taking advantage about stuff that is going to be happening to you today. So we're going to be talking about the future of test management, what you should know, but maybe more important than that, what you should do in order to continue evolving. And we'll talk about evolution in a second. By the way, I also wanted to thank the speakers yesterday. If you were not here, there will be recorded sessions, and it was amazing because people yesterday were talking about AI and automation and CI pipelines and developing your career, and all of these are things that I'm going to be talking about today. So it was really funny seeing that yesterday and today. And so, oh, there's already a question here. You cannot see the presenter? Okay, so there's someone here saying that they can see the slides, but not the presenter. Can you see me? I should be visible somewhere, hopefully. And if not, Helen, take a look and tell me if I need to do something differently. But thanks, anonymous attendee, for letting us know. In any case, we're going to be talking about stuff you should know and stuff that we talked about yesterday. And I also invite you to stick around because after my talk, there's going to be a couple of additional talks about AI in general and also in PractiTest if you want to see how it looks like. And we're going to be having Mohita from AST Corp talking about how she's built a center of excellence, and Anthony also giving some tips and tricks later on and the certification that Ellen just mentioned. But enough chatter. Let's actually get into it. And if someone can confirm if you can see me or not. And again, I'm not that beautiful a thing to see. As you can see, this is me. But yeah, if you want to see me, that would be also great. So who am I and where are you
I'm
listening
confirming that I can see you.
That's a shame, but thanks for letting me know. In any case, who am I? So yeah, hi, I'm Joel. I'm an accidental tester. I've been in testing for 24 years, and I wish I could say fresh out of college, but no, I actually started working in college as a tester without knowing what it was. It was basically a button pusher. We'll talk about that. And I grew within my job into being a lead, a QA manager, QA director. Over the years, I really like to interact with the community. So I blog someone, post someone, speak whenever people invite me. I do some consultancies here and there. And I also work as Chief Solution Architect in PractiTest, where my role is actually one of the coolest ones because a lot of what I do is go over to customers, see how they're working, understand how they're testing, and basically make sure that we have the best solution for them to work with. And if it is about evolving into more what Helen was talking, test orchestration, I will talk about that. Or if it's about how can we help better on DevOps testing, that's about that. So a lot of that is learning from you people, you beautiful nerds and geeks out there, proud geek myself. So it's great to do it. And I also get to do some other cool stuff like the online test conf for the state of testing that Helen was talking about. Enough about me. And let's actually talk about what we came here to talk about. So this is a question. I want you to think about it if you can. Again, not a lot, 3-5 seconds. What do you think, what have you seen change in testing over the last 5 to 10 years, 3 to 10 years, 3 to 7 years? I don't really care. Look into the ways that you're testing today that you were not testing a while ago. and think about what's been happening. And obviously a lot has changed, but I want to focus, here we are, on three main things. First of all, again, I'm not saying you're a dinosaur like I am, but we started working in waterfall a long time ago. Then we got into this agile thing. It took a little bit of time to get it started. Everyone seems to be doing agile now, and now we're switching over to DevOps, and there's a huge difference between them. On the other hand, and not related to this, we have a lot more and a lot better testing tools, functional automation testing tools. And if it wasn't by this and that, then one of the things that we've been told for the last, I don't know how many years, that we should shift left and shift right, it's actually happening, and that is modifying the way that we work. But okay, very high level, what do I mean by that? So when we zoom into the switch from waterfall to agile to DevOps, I want to emphasize something. It's not that waterfall was bad, agile was better, and DevOps is best. These are three separate things. And when we were working waterfall, under the conditions of waterfall, with the patience of the market in waterfall, it was great working waterfall. Agile was great because it helped us to work based on new requirements from the field. Basically, they want to get features faster. And so we were releasing a lot faster. And DevOps was another evolution when not only were we working Agile, but we are also managing our own servers. So these changes are basically saying that we need to test differently. Why? Because as I said, instead of having larger releases, we're having smaller releases, okay? On the other hand, we're releasing a lot faster. I see my team releasing once every 2 weeks, a lot of changes. We used to work on continuous deployment, so we're releasing a number of times a day. So yes, these are smaller changes, but faster releases. On the other hand, it's not only bad. We have, especially if you're working over DevOps, we have a lot of control over our production environments. Okay, it's not like it used to be that because we were sending CD-ROMs and people could install it basically anywhere, that we couldn't control our production environments. If you're working DevOps on this environment, then you have a lot of control over your production environment, which reduces a lot of the noise that you have in there. Now, from the business perspective, and obviously we are affected or influenced by our business, users can switch very much between products. And what do I mean by that? Pretty sure most of you have Netflix. But sometimes you're working with Netflix and the application crashes, automatically you open Prime and you go into Prime to watch TV, or you go over to Disney Plus or stuff like that. So we can switch over multiple applications. The same goes for payments apps. The same goes for entertainment apps. Anything that you are, it used to be a lot harder for end users to switch from platform to platform to platform. Now it's faster, easier to switch between them. So there's a lot of basically, it's a user's world in that sense, because people can actually switch very much, and we need to please them a lot. From a tester's perspective, if we go back over to DevOps, it has become a lot easier and faster to work on our production environments and find bugs in there. So much so, I'm not going to be talking about that here because the whole kind of worms, but in many cases, it's more recommended not to look for some of the bugs before production, and actually look for them in production. And again, I'm not talking about data loss or protection bugs. I'm talking about small UI bugs. And again, it makes the way that works a little bit different. And we have access to real user data. And we will talk about that more in a couple of minutes, but that means that a lot of the guesswork of how people are working with the systems has been taken away. We know how people are working, so we know where we need to test more and where we need to test less. Now, in another area, and I mentioned that, testing tools. Here I am talking about better, faster, easier, okay? We have, and again, this is an estimate, but I was talking with some people. If we look today versus where we were 20 years ago, we have a little bit over 10 times more automation tools than we had before. If you have 10 times more automation tools, that means that A, they are cheaper because you have a lot more people competing on that space. Even, again, very cool free tools or free options for tools. We have better tools, and they're simpler than ever to get started with. Okay, so a lot of those friction points that would not let us work with tools are actually being diminished or eliminated altogether. Now, in addition to having more functional automation tools, a lot of people in the QA world are reporting, and we mentioned the state of testing survey, that they're working with a lot of different tools, and not all of them are testing tools. We're working with CI tools, we're working with monitoring tools, we're working with log analysis tools, we're working with data analysis tools. So a lot of different tools are being used here. It's not only the spreadsheet that we used to have and the mouse that we used to have. Hey, I'm having now. It's a lot about the tools that we're using. So we need to use more and more tools. And another thing, when we look into the team, if it used to be the case that all of our reporting came from one tool, maybe, and a lot of automation on one tool, we have a lot of different tools working together. Why? Because we have a number of unit testing tools, we have a number of API testing tools, and we have a number of functional testing tools, and we might be testing mobile devices. We also have tools. And because everyone reports separately, we're generating what we're calling and seeing reporting silos or information silos, where everyone is reporting, but everyone has their own report, and it's very hard to make sense of it all. Okay, so testing tools, it's both a blessing and a curse by having more. Finally, when we look into the changes before we actually go into what we need to do differently, I'm talking here about shifting left and right. And yes, Agile is not new. Shifting left, shifting right is not something that we've been talking about in the last year. We have been talking about the last 10 years, 15 years. But it's finally happening. There were a lot of reasons why it took time for it to become more mainstream. Now it's mainstream, but it comes with a price. If your team has finally adopted more and more Agile, I'm not going to tell you anything new by saying that Agile is anything but order and simple. Yes, there's a lot more communication and there's a lot less paperwork, but it's a mess. Okay, because everything's changing and everything's fast, and we don't have time to do anything like we really would like to do. And documentation or handshakes and stuff, it's very, very hard to basically keep your head out of the water and breathe. So Agile is anything but order and simply. And if you're going to start shifting left and right, that means that not only are you working very, very fast and in a very chaotic environment, you also need to expand yourself more in order to cover more areas with your testing approach. We're working with smaller teams. That's right. Yes. So we're not working. I used to work on a testing team. We had about 40 testers and about 60 developers or 80 developers. So we're working on a smaller team. We're 5 developers and 1 or 2 testers, but it's in the context of a large organization. And all of a sudden, there's a lot more politics involved because, oh, who's testing that? Who's talking to whom? Can I get this resource, that resource? When push comes to shove, my working team is smaller. Maybe I'm working better with developers, so I'm a lot more technical, but the project itself became more political than it was before. As I've been talking about, yes, we can start testing earlier. We can shift left. But every time we have less and less time to test everything. So it's becoming a lot more about what automation do I have in place to cover my 6, or what type of risk analysis can I do? What can I not test before delivery and test after the product has been going into production? So it's a lot more complicated testing because basically we can test less. And if we talk about shifting right and going into development, so all of a sudden it's not only about testing the product. Wait a second, we need to test the deployment. We need to test the rollback. We need to do testing in production. So we're going to be working with the monitoring that we have in production. Do we have exceptions? Are we in charge of the exceptions? Should we take a look into those escaping defects? A lot of the work that used to be handled by other departments like customer success, customer support, it's also falling into us. On the other hand, we have real user data. So a lot of the guesswork is going now. Okay. Hey, are people using this feature that we just released? Yes. How? Oh, this is a new use case that we need to prove. Okay, so it's become a lot better because we have a lot more visibility and understanding about what's going on out there. So as you can see, it's not your daddy's testing team anymore. Okay, or your testing team if you're a dinosaur like I am. Things have changed. Yes, we're part of the development team, and that's great because there used to be a big wall, and I think that a lot of the people were talking yesterday about that virtual or less virtual world where people used to send us the build and go and figure it out. Now we're part of the development team. So there's a lot more that we can do before or even during that is better. But on the other hand, our job hasn't changed that much. We're still in charge of providing visibility into the quality of the product. We're still in charge about providing those projections on whether we're going to be able to release on time, or if we're going to be able to release all the user stories on time. So the objective hasn't changed that much. Only how we reach that objective has changed. As I said, and I'm guessing I'm not telling you anything new, our environment has become a lot more chaotic. Now, chaos is not bad, it's only complex. On the other hand, it gives you a lot more opportunities if you know how to work with them. And talking about opportunities, we can have more responsibility, we can have more power, and we can have more influence if we want them to, but only if we want them to. Because for a lot of testers, if you don't want to continue doing the same testing, you get the user story, you test it, you save their bugs, and you report them, but you could be doing a lot more. You could be having a lot more. I'm not talking about power more than anything else. I'm talking about influence. I'm talking about value for your organization. So you have a lot more opportunities here. By the way, as you notice, sometimes my kids are going to be wandering behind me. So again, it's part of that chaotic environment where we all work. So, and thanks to whoever helped me with this Pokemon icon, I love you. But it's about adapting or risking becoming irrelevant. Okay, if you don't evolve, it's not going to happen. And let's talk about evolution, because there are some cases of evolution that are amazing, and that is what I want you to keep in mind, not necessarily a Pokemon. I was in Dubai about 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago. This is me. This is my family. If you saw someone walking behind me, it's this little girl here called Alma. And we were in Dubai 2 months ago, and we went with my family, and it was a great trip. But I also learned quite a lot about Dubai. Dubai is one of the biggest and best examples that I've seen about evolution ever. Why? Because if you look at the history in Dubai, around the turn of the, not this century, but the previous century, it was only about nomad Bedouins working in Dubai. They were extremely poor. No money, no education, no anything, okay? These guys were actually roaming around the desert and, again, trying to do some trade and living in poverty, as most of the Middle East was working back then. But somewhere around the 1900s, they saw that in the areas of Dubai, there were pearl farms. So they became pearl farmers. And it was before Japan and the rest of the country started farming pearls in a more massive way. So the pearl market was actually a very lucrative market, and Dubai made a lot of money from farming pearls, and they became world famous for their pearls. But as with everything in the world, the pearl market went down, and they were very, very happy around the 1960s when the British discovered oil, not only in Dubai, but in the whole United Arab Emirates, as well as in Saudi Arabia. And all of a sudden, these guys were rich once again. But I don't know how many of you know that. Each one of the Emirates, there are 7 different Emirates. Each one of them has their own economy. And as it happens, the amount of oil in Dubai right now is close to zero. Their exports and the amount of money they get from oil is really, really low. On the other hand, they're a really, really rich country. Why? Because these guys were smart enough so that about 20 years ago, they decided they cannot depend on oil. And so they started developing a tourism agency inside of it. And now Dubai lives by tourism. It's an amazing place. Again, this is 40-degree weather. And they have a park where they have everything based on real flowers. And they have like a jet with flowers and everything with flowers. But that's one of the examples. They also have artificial islands, and you can ski in Dubai with 40-degree weather outside. And it's an amazing place to come and visit as a tourist. Now, the problem is that if you start looking into Dubai, everyone in the Emirates realized that tourism is a good thing. So now Abu Dhabi, for example, is developing also tourism, and they know that tourism is not going to take them all the way through. So if you talk with people in Dubai right now, they're going to tell you that what they're currently working on is technology. And so if you look, this is a COP in Dubai, where you already have a lot of places where they have incredible technology. So they're all the time evolving and evolving and evolving, because they're not looking where they need to be today. They're looking where they will need to be 20 years from now. And all the time they're doing like that. And I think that we should take a big example out of how Dubai actually works as testers, because testers have also evolved, but I think that we haven't evolved so proactively. Yes, when I started working, we were basically end users play with the system. And a lot of the older testers are going to tell you that they were end users, and someone told them, hey, can you please help me with some testing? And they became testers. Then we turned into what I like to call professional button clickers. we had some scenarios, but basically it was, hey, can you actually work with the system, press all the buttons, and tell us if you find any bugs, without a lot of planning, without a lot of engineering behind that. Then we became functional testing professionals, and not only functional testing professionals, but maybe testing professionals. We had our plans, we had our tools, we had our approaches. We were able to start defining more with developers how to work. And where we are today, especially around Agile, when we're starting to see a lot more of whole team testing and developers doing testing and present a lot of our automation, is that we have that opportunity to become more quality architects. And for me, a quality architect is similar to a security architect in a company, where the security architect in the development department is not in charge of developing all the security aspects of the system, because obviously everything has to have a security aspect. A quality architect is someone who will work with all the different people in the company to make sure that all the quality requirements are met. Okay, so it's a lot about how do you guide quality in the process. And this has always been kind of that focus where we want to get, where you don't test quality into the system, you cannot test quality into the system, you can build quality into the system. And I think that if you play your cards correctly, you have that chance of evolving into that kind of role. But looking into more specific matters, I want to go over and obviously ask you how's your testing evolved, but maybe kind of give you a couple of ideas of how your testing can evolve moving forwards with some concrete ideas of how stuff can be done. And again, I want to talk about strategies and approaches for your testing, the future of testing, but I'm also going to tell you, this is my partial list. It's mine because it's not coming out of some theories. This is stuff that we do day in, day out in the company or with customers that I'm working with day in, day out. But it's also mine because it comes from my perspective. And I'm pretty sure that it's obviously an incomplete list. And it's also a list that you might have other ideas. So I'm here more than to teach, to trigger that kind of thinking and make sure that everyone has their own ideas and can continue working in their own ways. But what do I mean by this? So let's talk about, again, not a lot of ideas, some areas where you could be improving, and let's get into that. So the first concept that I want to talk, the first idea, is the idea of holistic quality, or what I started talking about, the role of the quality engineer. And the first thing to mention here is that it's not my idea. Actually, Janet Gregory came up with this idea, or she published this idea on February last year. You can go to janetgregory.ca to read more about her blogs, but it's a great idea. She's been working on it with Lisa Crispin, and if the names sound familiar, if you've heard about the Agile testing books, they have 3 books right now. They are the co-authors, and they're great with those ideas. But the whole idea of holistic quality is talking about looking at your whole entire operation. In this case, we're looking into a DevOps approach, but you can look at it in your Agile approach. You can look at it in your waterfall approach or in your custom build approach, and not wait for that testing section to do testing work or quality work, but in every one of the separate phases, how can you introduce testing work? So if you're talking about during the understanding factor where you're analyzing user story, think about ATTD and PDD, think about examples or prototypes that you could be testing. And when you're building, start looking into your unit tests. Yes, they're developed by your developers, but you could start working with that and devise your test strategies and your testing story for features. And where you're deploying testing infrastructure and test deployment, and every single aspect of your process, there are testing sub aspects to them. And it's not to wait for when you're called and said, hey, this is the feature, go ahead and test it. But how can you introduce aspects of testing on each one of your phases? That's why it's holistic, because it's looking at the whole process as a whole and try to provide into that. Now, the catch here, you will need to adapt it, because you will need to adapt it, first of all, to your process. There are no 2 Agile processes that are exactly the same, because everyone adapts it to themselves. Same goes for waterfall or for DevOps. And it's also going to be based on your constraints. Where can you start working? You never start doing everything at once. You start from the low-hanging fruit and you start building upon it. So it's a pretty cool approach. It's a different way of looking into testing and quality as part of your process, but it will require a lot of work. It will require a lot of convincing. But you know what? If I had to choose only one approach, it's this one because it will envelop all the other things that I'm going to be talking about right now. But holistic quality, I think that it's the key because we're not limiting ourselves when they tell us go ahead and test. We're looking to the whole process and we're trying to inject quality into the process in that way. Another thing that I've seen working extremely successful, and I really like it, and I think it's simple and it brings a lot of value. It's something that I like to call methodic shift left testing. Okay. And we talk about shift left, and everyone says, oh, shift left is easy. It's just to go over the user stories and make sure that they're working. Yes, it's easy. Maybe it's better to say simple than easy because it's not as easy as it sounds, but you could be doing quite a lot more. First of all, what do you look at when you read a user story? Okay. It's not about reading it and starting to think about the tests that you want to do and writing them down. It's about, hey, wait a second. When I read the story and I look at the diagrams and all the stuff in there, are all the points covered? Did we miss something? Did we define the behavior of these other scenarios? We want to make sure that everything is as covered as possible. Look for inconsistencies. A lot of times when someone writes a user story, they're very focused on that functionality and maybe they forgot about some functionality on another area that's close to that and we need to take it into account, or something that is actually going contrary to this functionality in here. So try to look into that. Think about deployment considerations. Do we have data migration? We don't have data migration. Can we roll it back? Are we actually thinking about what are we going to be doing there? So it's not only about reading the user story and thinking about the cases. Another thing that we need to start working on is to try to understand and think more about the business. Okay. I have news for you. If we are working as a team on a user story and we're going to be investing, I don't know, 4 man weeks on this one user story and maybe another man week in testing and in deployment, the business people are expecting to get something out of it. What the thing that they want to get out of it? I don't know. Maybe they want to get more clicks on an area of the system that converts more. Maybe they want to see people adopting more things. Maybe they just want to get their value from the reviews on the Apple Store to go higher. Understand what are those values that your business people, your product people want to get, and make sure that we're calculating that. Make sure that if we have an MVP, a most valuable, a minimal viable product that we want to have in here, what is the criteria for that minimal viable product if it's something that we're going to be able to have it? Why? Because sometimes people will say, oh, we want to get more clicks on that button. But that means that we need to have a benchmark. So we need to understand how many clicks we have today. And then we need to release this product, let it run for a day, a week, a month, and be able to validate that. So a lot of time we need to think about that. And this is something we can actually bring into the conversation as part of that user story value hypothesis analysis. Also, feature instrumentation. And we're going to be talking about production metrics, but instrumentation basically means we want to know once this feature is going to be released, if people are using it, if people are clicking on them, okay? And there are tools for that, but you need to instrument it. You need to make sure that there are calls that are going to be logging that if you want. So instrumentation is a very, very big factor. And if we don't add that as part of those user stories, it's not going to happen on its own. Okay, so a lot of that is going to be stuff that you can do before anything gets done. What other concerns we need to have on production? So a lot of shifting left is not only about rating and writing your test cases, it's about evaluating that everything that has to be in the user story, all the preparations are there. Moving forward. Even before we formally get a feature for testing, there's quite a lot of testing that we can do. And one of the things that I love it, and we do it internally in PractiTest, is a practice that we've called testing while developing. And it's like reviewing and fixing your plane as it's flying. That's why I love this picture. And it's a lot like that, but in the development and testing world. So basically, what we mean by that, make sure that you can get some testing done while the product is still being developed. Why do you want to do that? I hope that it's simple to everyone. Because if you're able to catch a bug while the developer is working on it, it will be easier to fix it. Because if the bug is not about, oh, there's an exception here, but oh, what the heck, you're doing something that you were not supposed to do. This is not what they meant to do in the user story. You're going to be saving a lot of time. Okay, so it's a lot about making sure that those validation points, both on are we building the right thing and are we building the thing right, happen as we're developing. The easiest way to do it is to schedule 1 or 2 paired testing and discovery sessions with your developers. Again, it should be on that sweet spot when the developer has started to work on the feature, there's enough to give feedback, but there's still time to make changes. So somewhere around halfway there, you need to schedule it. If it's a long user story, you can do 2 of those. If it's a short user story, try to get 1 of them. If it's a user story that is trivial, okay, don't do it. But then at least understand that you're going to be doing. But it's simple. You schedule 30 minutes, an hour with your developer. That person takes you over the system and you start thinking about stuff to check. And many times you will see that, oh shit, approach from the developer where he or she realizes that, oh yeah, you just got into a potential bug that it's going to be easier for them to solve and resolve while they're working on that. A lot of things that I like to do and I tell my testers to do is to revise with their developer the internal acceptance criteria. Internal acceptance criteria is a very sophisticated term to what the heck am I going to test once you give me this? Because if I already thought about my testing as a tester, and I can come to the developer and say, hey, you know what? Once you give it to me, these are the things that I'm going to be testing. If the developer is smart enough, and usually they are, they will test that stuff before they give it to you to be tested over there, because there's nothing that they hate more than giving you something and 5 minutes later understanding they have a showstopper. So give them that internal testing criteria. And again, as I said, it's not only about making sure there are no bugs, it's to make sure that user story matches what the product owner wanted to have in there. And yes, maybe you don't know, but the chances that both you and the developer did not understand what the product owner was saying are lower than if only one of you didn't understand what was coming out. So it's a way to avoid those issues later on. Sorry. And again, it's very simple to do, but it's very hard to do it consistently. It's very hard to get your team to understand that this is something we want to do day in, day out, and to make sure that you catalog, these are user stories that we want to do early testing, these are user stories that we don't. Another thing that I've seen work incredibly nice is rapid fire testing, okay? And this is extremely focused testing covering the areas that have to be covered. And usually what happens here is if we have a user story that has some delicate parts of it or some very important user stories, this can be instead of in addition to what we were talking before, you need to go and define exactly what we want to do in here. Let's say that this is a user story that is very, very hard and complicated and you want to go ahead and give feedback before. So first of all, it's going to be done a little bit later in the game. It should be when most of it is already done. But you want to provide some initial information quickly on those important user stories. You define your objectives and you actually take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, put on your headphones, no one should bother you, and you go very, very deep and very, very focused on that functionality. Where the idea is that you might need to do, again, more regression testing and more thorough testing, but you want to provide that first, hey, we're on the right track, it looks okay, I haven't found any showstoppers. You actually do it as a rapid fire testing. You should actually document your activities to avoid duplications, especially when you're going to be finding showstopper bugs. You want to know what you already tested so that you can go over them, or if everything's fine, avoid duplication later on regression. But at least for the people are going to be asking, what have you tested before you tell me also what you found? You should be documented that even if you're doing exploratory testing, session-based testing, make sure that you document everything that you're doing. And the idea is to provide feedback on the spot. It's not that, okay, I'm going to be doing my 45-minute session, and then I'm going to be waiting, and then I have to send a formal report to someone. No, we do the 45-minute session. Before I formally report my bugs in PractiTest or Jira or ClickUp or whatever, I'm going to tell you what I found. And I'm going to reproduce it to you. And we're going to be working here because the idea is to have a very, very quick turnaround time. Imagine a commando unit. You go in, you fetch what you came for, and you go out. Okay, it's a formal process, but in a more rapid way of working. Okay, it's not to be done everywhere, and it's not instead of doing your regression testing, but it's going to be a very, very effective way of working. And again, many times it's not a one-time operation because you might go very deep, find a bunch of showstoppers, they go back to work, they work a day or two, and then you go again very deep to make sure that now things are actually clean. But it's a very, from a testing perspective, very, very satisfying way of working. Okay, so I really, really like it, and I recommend when it's relevant. Another point, and this one is completely different from what we've been talking about up to now, it's the concept of test orchestration. Let me just drink for a sec. You remember when I was talking earlier about the fact that we have a lot more tools right now? And the problem is we have a lot more tools is that we're generating information silos. Every tool is reporting on their own XML report separately or their own HTML report separately. And when we come over to our management, they want to know the status of the system. They don't care where it came from. Okay, so test orchestration comes to solve that. It actually means that we need to go over all of our testing. I don't care if it's going to be unit testing, integration testing, functional, UAT, even monitoring you have. And then you unify and normalize those reports for your stakeholders. Now, here are two separate things. Unified means we're going to be putting all of that information together. But it's not enough to just aggregate it in a dumb fashion because we still need to make sure that we organize the information based on application areas, platforms, whatever we're going to be testing. And not only that, we need to normalize the reports because you will have literally thousands of unit tests and maybe a couple hundreds of API tests and maybe some tens of functional tests. So you need to make sure that they actually can talk together with each other. So you group your unit test into classes, okay? And maybe you group your API test also into areas, and then you're able to compare apples to apples, or at least units that have the same size so that people can see it. Because if you have 3 tests failing out of 15,027, it might provide the wrong impression to a stakeholder. Whereas if you're able to normalize that and to show more information or better information, it's going to be easier in that sense. Now, the idea here is to align all efforts and all teams and all testing artifacts to the same. You need to be able to show everything that has been tested. And once you do that, then you start finding interesting information. For example, it's very normal that you will see stuff that is called overcovered. Everyone is testing this area of the application, but this area is relatively untested by automation. So once you start seeing the whole picture, you know how to start balancing your automation coverage in order to be more intelligent in that sense. Okay, so again, try to use it. And the idea here is that at the end of the day, your stakeholders don't really care where the information came from. They only want to see the information overall. Now we're reaching the end. Have a couple more here, but first of all, quality dashboards. And here is that question of if a tree falls on an empty forest, who cares if it makes a sound? The forest was empty, right? So the same applies to tests. If you're testing someone, but no one cares about the results, no one cares if it passes, if it fails, if you haven't run it at all, why are you even running that test? Okay, so it works both ways. If you have a test that no one cares about, don't run it. But if you have test cases that people care about, make sure that you're reporting on that. Okay, so you should be able to create good visibility to your stakeholders, but understanding what are their needs and what are their questions. Then build those quality dashboards. If people want to know, for example, these are the top 3 user stories that we want to release. They want to look at the coverage in there, they want to look at the testing completion in there, and they want to look at the showstoppers in there. Okay, they don't care about the other information. They might care only later on. So make sure that your quality dashboards are taking that into account. One of the things that I tell my people who ask me is focus always on providing 3 levels of information. These are the areas that are problematic, meaning there are issues right now, and we know that there are issues right now. We need to handle these issues. These are the areas that are risky, maybe because we haven't tested them, maybe because they're running late, maybe because we have some instability in there, we're not able to do it. Oh, and all of these are the areas that are clear, so we can release them all of a sudden. So that is the way that people, usually stakeholders, expect to hear from us. Okay, where do we need to focus right now? Where do we need to understand if we need to focus right now? And where can we be rest assured about? Okay, once you start talking in those terms, people are going to like way more what you're saying. Now, something that it's a little bit more advanced, especially if you're working on DevOps environments, but I think it's worth the effort, is everything related to alerts and user behavior. Okay, it's part of what people call testing in production. Testing in production might mean that you're also testing while in production, but not necessarily. It also means that as the system is working in production, what type of testing or quality data you can get out of it. So first of all, it's to understand what's going on in real life. Okay, are people using the system? Let's say that you assume that people are going to be creating reports in your project. Why? Because your system is an information management system, and so reports make a lot of sense. What happens if all of a sudden you realize that people are not present in the reporting engine, or the reporting engine is not working? All of a sudden you realize that there is an issue here because there was an expected behavior that it's not happening. Maybe there's a bug, maybe there's a bug that someone will report. Stuff like that is very, very important. By the way, also if we talk about exceptions, that is with regards to user behavior, but there's alerts and exceptions. As it happens, and again, I work for a SaaS product, a lot of times you start seeing exceptions, especially after release, that you're able to see the exception before people get to customer support and say, hey, there's a bug. So if you're able to see that exception and you're able to notify that exception and development is, or the DevOps team is able to fix that exception earlier, then it's better when someone actually rings support, you tell them, hey, we're aware of that, it's already been fixed, or hey, we're aware of that, a fix is coming in 2 minutes from now, or in 5 minutes from now, or in 10 minutes from now. That is actually part of what quality happens. So it's a lot about looking into stuff happening in production and fixing it. Remember, a lot of times it's not even about your testing. You don't have the data to test everything. So by using those exceptions and those issues and that behavior happening in production, you're able to get a very big head start on what is happening. And more often than not, it's about learning how people are working by examining data. You remember that I was talking about instrumentation earlier on? I was talking about user behavior and feature analysis. We don't need to guess how people are working with our system. We don't need to guess that, oh, 15% of our users are going to be clicking this button. You can actually go and see it, okay? And then you can start not only understanding how people are working, understanding where you need to test more or where can you allow yourself to test less. Okay, a lot of that guessing work can be taken out if only you start looking into how people are working with your system. So last but not least, escaping defects and NPS reports. I think that we're very good at grading our systems. We're very good at telling, hey, this is where we're good, this is where we're bad from an application perspective. But I think that we need to look into our, again, ourselves and understand we're doing a good enough job. So first of all, escaping defects is a great metric. I think it's a very simple metric, but it tells you, hey, are we testing in the correct places? And if we're not, where do we need to improve? By the way, it's not only about testing. An escaping defect to me is a bug that was reported by a developer that we choose to fix soon enough. It might be a hot fix or it might be in the next coming updates, regardless if we found it or not during the development process. Because if we found the bug, we said that we can fix it later on, but then we release it as a hot fix. That means that, okay, we're good at finding it, we're not good at cataloging. Okay, so escaping defects it's a very important metric. And again, it's a very good metric to understand if you're working correctly and having good assumptions. It also helps you to examine your risk assumptions. Okay, usually it's not that we don't want to test something. As I said, we don't have time to test everything, so we're compromising on these areas. It helps you to do that. Helps you to find areas to improve. And the NPS, especially NPS, by the way, we don't have time, a long time, but you should review that if you're not using it. It's the Net Promoter Score. Basically, when you get that questionnaire, how likely are you to recommend whatever this application from 1 to 9, and you give a grade, and then you provide some feedback. That is the NPS, a great way of measuring how people like your product. It's a great way to understand how people are looking at your product. Okay, and I think that it's not about looking at one NPS report, it's about looking how the progress of your NPS actually happens over time to make sure people are liking you more or less. Okay, and it's a great way to understand overall feedback. So this is only my partial list. Obviously, you can add more stuff or move stuff based on what you want to do. But what I wanted to do is to share it with you so that you can start testing differently today. You don't need to work for tomorrow. You can wait for tomorrow, but don't wait too much for that. Because most of the stuff that I mentioned today, you can apply it now and you don't really need to wait. So with that, I want to thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And if not, I think that you can even get a couple of minutes of rest before Ido takes to the stands.
Okay. Hi,
Can I
Joel.
drink, Helen? Hey, Helen.
Agreed. We are very matchy today. Okay, thank you for that. That was great. I think we all learned a lot about what the future holds. We are getting a couple questions I wanted to send your way. One is, what is your wildest dream for the future of testing? And I'll add my own comment. Like, if you could pick one thing that you wish we had or you want to have in the future, what is that one thing?
Okay. I would like to be able to get a better understanding where do we need to test better on the next batch? Because as much as we can use NPS and as much as we can use escaping defects and stuff like that, I think that a lot of testing is about risk analysis. Okay, where do we want to test more? Where do we want to test less? But it's a lot of guessing work in there. Okay, regardless of how much metrics we can get around it, that is the hardest part. The hardest part is to understand what test cases you can allow yourself not to run. Okay, so I really like to have a system that will help me to, first of all, make those decisions in the future, but also to grade those decisions for myself to understand if I'm doing a good job or not. And I don't think that we're very far from that. I think that we will be able to get to that in the coming years.
Okay, great. And the last question I'm seeing here is about, I guess, business sizes is the way I would phrase this. Do you think, in your opinion, there's a difference between SMBs and companies at the enterprise level in terms of all of these future advancements that we're seeing and we hope to see?
Yes and no. I think that it's not so much on the business side, but the nature of your business. Because at the end of the day, an application is an application. You need to test it. And if the application is hosted, meaning it's a SaaS system, then you will be able to test it in one way. If it's an installable system, it's another way. But the amount of risk that I can take, the amount that the how deep do I need to go into testing? And yesterday, one of the speakers was talking about, hey, if you're testing the was it 737 or 797, the one that actually the plane that crashed, because we didn't do enough testing, people died. Or if you're working on a pacemaker, if you don't do all the testing, people might die. Whereas if I'm testing a game app, oh come on, I'm not saying anything about gaming companies, but you can test less, you can take more risks. Okay. So I think that it's more about the vertical where you are that will define your approach to testing, and the technology that will define also your approach to testing. The size of the company, I don't know. They're very small companies that have a lot of users, and that is, I think, it's obviously there's going to be some influence on the maturity of the company. Startup companies care more about testing quickly than stability, but I think that it's gonna matter less at the end of the day.
Okay, so you're saying it's really more about their product, their purpose, what they're trying to achieve, than whether they're a small
and their
business.
technology, because you can have very young companies working with very advanced technologies, and you can have very established companies working with very advanced technologies. And I think that your technology stack and the vertical when you are going to dictate a lot more than the size of your company as a whole.
Okay, great. Well, if anyone else has any more questions, comments, and thoughts, please share them or use the raise your hand feature. And at any point later as
sharing.
well. Yes. Any more questions that come in, Joel, I'll be happy to send your way. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the day.